After 3 decades on this bench, I have heard every excuse a human being is capable of inventing. The registration was lost. The other driver ran the light. The universe conspired against them at precisely the wrong moment. People have called me tough. People have called me blunt. And they would not be wrong on either count. Nobody walks into my courtroom to tell the truth. They walk in to survive it. But every so often, something happens that stops me cold. This was one of those days. If you're new here, I've spent 30 years on this bench, and I have more stories like this one. Subscribe so you don't miss them. His name was Thomas, just Thomas. No last name in the booking file, no address, no phone number, no next of kin listed anywhere. The charges themselves were unremarkable on paper: vandalism, destruction of property, disorderly conduct. But the arresting officer's report contained a single line I had never encountered in 3 decades on this bench. The suspect threw a brick through the front window of Sal's Market at 2:15 in the morning, did not flee, sat down on the curb, and waited for the patrol unit. Upon arrival, he immediately extended his hands for cuffing and said, quote, "It was my fault. I have watched people deny crimes I personally witnessed on video. I have sat here while defendants argued with their own signed confessions as though the ink itself had somehow lied. And here was a man who shattered a window in freezing rain, then sat down on a wet curb and patiently waited to be arrested for something he had clearly done with full intention. No coercion, no confusion, no excuse offered at the outset. Something was profoundly right about this man, and I needed to understand exactly what that was before I did anything else with his case. I reviewed the security footage before taking the bench because something told me the paperwork was not going to tell me the complete story. A cold, miserable, rainy Tuesday night. The kind of cold that doesn't simply chill you, it works its way into your bones and refuses to leave. On that footage, Thomas paced back and forth in front of that market for 10 full minutes, like a man arguing with his own conscience in real time. Not drunk, not enraged, but cornered, like an animal that had simply run out of road and out of options. Then he bent down, picked up a loose brick from a nearby construction pile, closed his eyes for exactly 1 second, and threw it. The glass exploded outward. The alarm screamed into the empty street. And Thomas sat down on the wet pavement, pulled his knees to his chest, and waited. He took nothing from inside that store, not a single item. He just sat in the rain like a man waiting for a bus and let the consequences of what he had deliberately done come and find him. When he walked into my courtroom the following morning, the energy of the room shifted the moment he crossed the threshold. A small man, worn thin by years of deprivation, you could read right off his frame. A coat 3 sizes too large, held together with duct tape and safety pins, mismatched shoes. But his head was up, his eyes were forward, his shoulders were squared despite everything stacked against him. He was exhausted past anything most people in that room would ever know, but completely, unmistakably clear. The arresting officer, a 20-year veteran who had genuinely seen everything this city could produce, stood off to the side, watching Thomas not with anger, but with a furrowed brow, like a man trying to work out a puzzle he couldn't crack even after making the arrest himself. Thomas walked straight to the microphone before I had finished the docket. No lawyer, no hesitation. It was my fault, Your Honor. I broke the window. I did it on purpose. I am guilty. I let the silence breathe for a moment. Usually I have to extract the truth from people like pulling splinters. This man handed it to me like an offering, and still, something didn't sit right. Sir, you are not intoxicated. You took nothing from that store. You broke a window at 2 in the morning and sat down in freezing rain to wait for police. My question is simple. Why? The room went still, the kind of still that settles in right before something important is said. And Thomas, for once, gave me the unvarnished truth. It was cold, Your Honor. 15 degrees that night. Wind off the water, cutting right through this coat. He pulled the duct tape tighter without thinking. Every shelter in the city was full by 6 in the evening. I sat in an alley for hours. Around 1 in the morning, I stopped shivering. He met my eyes without flinching. That's when I got scared, Judge. When you stop shivering, that's when you don't wake up. I've seen it happen to other men on the street. I knew if I fell asleep out there, I wasn't getting up again. The realization settled over the room slowly, like cold water finding a crack. "So you broke the window to get arrested," I said. "I knew the alarm would go off. I knew someone would come." "The holding cell is warm, Your Honor. They give you a sandwich. It's dry, but it's food. And there's a roof." I traded my freedom for one night of heat. A murmur moved through the gallery. The officer looked down at his boots. He already knew. That was why his report carried no anger. He had booked a man who committed a crime deliberately because a jail cell was the best option available to him on a Tuesday night in January. "Thomas, my records show no prior arrests, not one in 62 years. What happened to you?" He straightened slightly, a flicker of the man he used to be rising through the exhaustion, like a light switching on in a room that had been dark for a long time. "I was a machinist for 30 years. Worked at the textile plant near Pawtucket until it closed in 2008. I had a house, a good truck, a wife named Sarah." His eyes filled the moment he said her name, and he made no effort to hide it from the room. "We were happy, genuinely happy for a very long time. Sarah got sick 5 years ago, cancer. The insurance wouldn't cover the experimental treatments that gave her the best chance, so we sold the house, drained our savings, and ran up every card we had between the two of us. I spent every last cent trying to save her. I lost her anyway. After that, I had nothing left. No money, no house, no real reason to get up in the morning. I just drifted, and here I am, standing in front of you. The weight of it pressed down on the entire room. A man who had worked hard his whole life, loved deeply, sacrificed everything he had, and the world had let him fall through every available crack until he was breaking storefront windows just to survive a January night. This is the part of the story that gets me every time. If it's getting to you as well, the subscribe button is right there. More of these every week. I looked towards Sal Moretti, the market owner, a large man built from a lifetime of hauling crates, who had walked in that morning fully expecting a restitution order. But as Thomas spoke, I watched Sal's posture change completely. The anger drained right out of him. "Mr. Moretti, you are entitled to restitution under the law." Thomas spoke first, his voice cracking. "I'll pay you back, Sal. My hands still work. I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't want to die." Sal looked at Thomas, really looked at him. Then he wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "Your Honor, I've seen Thomas around the neighborhood for years. He never begs, never bothers customers. I've watched him sweep my sidewalk for nothing just to have something useful to do with his hands. I had no idea about his wife, no idea he was this close to the edge." He turned to Thomas directly. "I can't take money from a man who broke a window to keep from freezing to death. Insurance covers the glass. He's already paid enough." He shook his head firmly. "Not a dollar." The courtroom exhaled together. Pure, unexpected relief. "Forget it, Tom," Sal said. 3 words with the quiet finality of a door gently closed. They sounded exactly like forgiveness. "That is genuinely generous, Mr. Moretti," I said. "As far as the victim is concerned, this matter is resolved. But Thomas, the state still has charges against you. And if I release you right now, where are you going tonight? 10 degrees, snow in the forecast." The panic that had briefly left Thomas's face came flooding back. "Judge, please, if you let me go, I'm back on the sidewalk tonight. Give me 30 days. It's warm in county. If you release me, I might not make it to morning. I have heard people beg for mercy, for forgiveness, for second chances. It is a rare and terrible thing to hear a man beg you to send him to prison because it is the only place guaranteed to give him a blanket and a meal." The officer spoke up. "Judge, if Thomas is sentenced even 30 days, he gets a record. A record disqualifies him from the housing program he's been on the waiting list for 8 months. A trap built directly into the system. Sentence him and he's warm tonight, but carries a record for the rest of his life. Release him and he keeps a clean record and walks into 10-degree weather with nowhere to go." There had to be a third door. Finding the door that isn't on the blueprint is the entire job. I reached under the bench and pulled out my personal checkbook. The sound of that drawer opening was the loudest thing in the room. The stenographer stopped typing mid-sentence. The gallery went completely silent. Every eye in that courtroom locked onto my hands. My hand shook slightly as I uncapped my pen. Not from age. I want to be clear about that. From frustration at watching a broken system force a decent, grieving man into becoming a criminal just to survive one winter night. I wrote the date. I wrote the name of a clean, modest motel down the road, the kind with reliable hot water and a heater that actually functions. On the amount line, $500. Officer approached the bench. He stared at the check, then at me, visibly bewildered. Your Honor, this is your personal account. It is. I'm remanding Thomas into your custody for 1 hour, not to county, to that motel. This covers 2 weeks of warmth, hot showers, and 3 meals a day. Can I count on you? He folded the check, tucked it into his pocket, straightened his uniform, and gave me one sharp nod. Consider it done, Judge. I'll drive him there myself. Judge, no, Thomas said. I have never taken a handout in my life. This is not a handout. It is an investment. 2 weeks of dignity. In exchange, you use every resource available to get back on your feet. Do you accept? His knuckles went white on the podium. He nodded, and the tears that came were not from the cold this time. Sal's hand shot up. Hold on. He walked to the railing. 2 weeks isn't enough, Thomas. You said you can fix things. Engines, shelving, electrical, anything with moving parts. My delivery van has been grinding for a month. I need shelving built. I can pay minimum wage, lunch every day, and cash until you've got a bank account. 8 o'clock tomorrow. The room made a sound that wasn't quite applause. The sound of people setting down something heavy they hadn't realized they'd been carrying. You'd give me work after I broke your window? You were cold and desperate. I've been cold before too, Tom. Sal held his gaze. Don't be late. This is what justice is supposed to look like. Not a hammer swung at someone already on the ground, a hand reaching down to help them up. But as the officer placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder to lead him out, Thomas stopped. He reached into his coat and pulled out a tarnished silver locket on a broken chain, setting it gently on the railing. Judge, this was Sarah's. Her photo is inside. The only thing I never sold. I slept with it in my hand every night so no one could take it. I want you to hold it as collateral. He had nothing left in the world. Standing there in mismatched shoes and a coat held together with duct tape, and he was voluntarily surrendering the one piece of his former life he had managed to keep through everything. Not asking for pity, but doing what a man of honor does when someone extends credit he hasn't yet earned. He offers what he has. Thomas, I can't accept this. You have to. You're putting up your own money for a stranger off the street. You need some form of security. If I don't come through, at least you have this. It's real silver. It has real value. This was never about money on either side of the exchange. It was about his dignity, plain and simple. He needed to enter this as a man making a deal, not as a beggar accepting charity. If I refused, I might take from him something I could never give back. I opened the locket carefully. A faded photograph of a young woman with a wide, bright smile, and beside it, a small lock of dark hair. I closed it gently. I accept this as collateral. It stays in the court safe, sealed with your name on it, until you walk back through these doors with a pay stub and a key to your own apartment. Then it's yours again. That's the deal. That's the deal, Judge. Thank you. As they walked out, the courtroom stayed quiet until the heavy oak doors clicked shut. I sat there holding Sarah's locket. It felt heavier than any gavel I have ever lifted. The weight of a love story, of a life dismantled piece by piece, of a promise from a man who had nothing left to offer but his word. Lock this up, I told the clerk. Guard it carefully. That night, I couldn't sleep. $500. To some people, a dinner out. To Thomas, the difference between life and death. The next morning, the officer was waiting outside my chambers, exhausted in the particular way people look when they've done something that genuinely mattered instead of sleeping. Judge, the motel manager gave Thomas the corporate discount when I explained the situation. The 500 stretches to 3 weeks now. He grinned, and I stopped by Sal's this morning. Thomas was there at 7:30, 30 minutes early, sweeping up the last of the glass he'd broken himself. Coffee in one hand, broom in the other. clean, shaved. Sal found him work boots in the storage room. He waved at me like a neighbor, like a man who finally belonged somewhere. His voice went rough. The check didn't bounce, Judge, in any sense of the word. We are not done yet. This is the part of the story I think about most. Stay around and subscribe if you haven't, because what happens at the next hearing is the reason I'm telling you this one at all. 3 weeks later, on the morning of Thomas's status hearing, I walked into a courtroom that genuinely surprised me from the moment I stepped through the door. A man stood in the center aisle I did not immediately recognize. A pressed plaid shirt tucked into clean khaki pants, sturdy new work boots, clean-shaven, hair trimmed short, shoulders pulled back, holding a manila folder with both hands like it contained something genuinely important to him, because it absolutely did. It took me 5 full seconds standing there before I realized I was looking at Thomas. Sal stood beside him in his finest Sunday suit, grinning like a proud father at a graduation. The officer stood near the back and caught my eye with one small, sharp thumbs up. "Good morning, Your Honor," Thomas said, a completely different voice now, full and steady, the voice of a man with somewhere real to be. He opened the folder. "I'd like to present proof that I held up my end of the deal. 3 documents. A letter from the motel manager praising him as an exemplary guest who had repaired a broken ice machine at no charge. A pay stub from Sal's market for 3 weeks plus overtime. And a signed lease on a studio apartment with a move-in date set for the 1st of the month. Thomas, starting from a holding cell and a $500 check, you secured employment, rebuilt your identification, and signed a lease in 3 weeks. That is not luck. That is a man who decided he was going to live." Sal helped. "The officer checked on me every day. I didn't do this alone." "You did the work," Sal said firmly. "Every single shift. Don't take that away from yourself. But, Judge, there's one more thing." Thomas reached into his pocket and laid 5 crisp $100 bills on the railing. "I know you said it was an investment, but I pay my debts, Your Honor. This is clean money. Fixing the van, building shelves, staying late. Please take it." "Thomas, I'm not taking your money. Put it toward your apartment." He shook his head with quiet, firm dignity. "I have the deposit saved separately. I need to give this back to redeem my collateral." There it was. He wasn't simply repaying a financial debt. He was earning back the right to wear his wife's locket again through his own hands, through his own word kept. You earned it back the moment you walked in with that lease. Please, Judge, let me do this the right way. Sarah always said a debt paid is a burden lifted. I looked at Sal. He nodded. Let him. All right, Thomas. I accept. I broke the seal on the envelope and slid the locket into my palm. It caught the light. Small, quiet, and beautiful. I held it out. Thomas's hand shook, not from cold this time, but from receiving back something he had been certain was gone forever. He fastened it around his neck right there at the microphone, tucked it under his shirt, over his heart, and closed his eyes for a moment. Thank you. I feel like I have her back. I reached for my gavel, and that is when the officer stepped forward again. Your Honor, one more person would like to address the court. Not a witness to the crime, a witness to the man. She has been waiting outside. The heavy oak doors swung open. A young woman stepped in, no older than 30, clutching her handbag with both hands, eyes scanning the room with the kind of urgency that told you immediately she was searching for one specific person. The instant her gaze landed on the man standing at the microphone, clean-shaven in a pressed shirt, a silver locket catching the light at his collar, she froze completely where she stood, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Thomas turned around slowly. The moment he saw her, every bit of color drained from his face. He grabbed the wooden railing for support, his legs visibly unsteady beneath him. Every ounce of composure he had carried all morning evaporated, replaced entirely by an expression of pure, disbelieving vulnerability. Jenny, he whispered, barely even a sound. Dad, she said, and ran. Not a walk, a sprint. Straight into his arms, burying her face in his plaid shirt. He stood frozen for 1 second, arms hovering uncertainly in the air around her, almost afraid to make contact, as though he feared she might not be entirely real. Then, with one long, shuddering breath, he wrapped his arms fully around her and came apart completely and quietly, right there in the middle of my courtroom. "I'm sorry," he kept whispering into her hair. "I'm so sorry, baby girl. I'm so terribly sorry." Jennifer turned to each of us in turn. "You gave him a job," she told Sal. "Best worker I've got," Sal said, shrugging. "You found me," she told the officer. "Just doing the job, ma'am." Then she looked up at me. "He told me what you did. You paid for his room out of your own pocket. You gave him back his dignity." "I gave him a little time," I said. "He did the rest himself." "Your father is a strong man, Jennifer. I don't think he survived just to survive. I think he survived to find his way back to you." She took his hand. "You're coming home with me, Dad. We have a spare room. The kids have been asking about you." "Kids?" "Two of them. Sarah's 5, Mike's 3. Sarah has been asking about her grandpa for 2 years." Thomas glanced at the lease he had worked so hard to earn. His own place, his own key, his independence rebuilt from nothing. I watched him weigh it against what stood in front of him. "Go," I said simply. "The lease can be broken. The apartment will still be there, and Sal is going to need you regardless of where you sleep." "He's not losing my best machinist," Sal said, "but family comes first, always." Thomas looked at his daughter, at the locket resting over his heart, at the sunlight coming through the high windows. 2 years of cold nights and quiet grief seemed to lift all at once. "Okay," he said, "I'm coming home." I reached for my gavel. "The charges against the defendant are hereby dismissed. There is no criminal standing in this courtroom, only a father who has been found. Thomas, you are free to go." The gavel came down and the courtroom erupted. Not polite applause, real applause. Strangers on their feet, people who had come in to contest traffic tickets, standing for a man they had never met. Thomas embraced Sal, shook the officer's hand with both of his. "Thank you for the ride, for the sandwich, for the call this morning." "Stay warm, Thomas," the officer said, smiling. Walking down the aisle with his daughter's arm linked through his, Thomas looked back at me one last time, touched the locket, touched his heart, and gave me one slow, deliberate nod, a silent gesture carrying more meaning than any words could have held. They walked out into the sunlight. I sat for a long moment after those doors closed. This is exactly why we sit in this chair. Not to punish people in the abstract, not to enforce rules simply because they exist on the books, but to restore, to find somewhere inside the rigid machinery of the law some small way to return human beings to themselves and back to each other. As I was gathering my files to leave for the day, the officer came back through the doors alone, holding a plain white envelope. "Thomas left this with the bailiff right before he walked out," he said. "He asked that you receive it personally after he was already gone." Inside was a single sheet of stationery from Sal's Market, folded once. The handwriting was uneven but clearly deliberate, the careful script of a man who hadn't had much reason to sit down and write anything in a very long time. "Dear Judge," it read, "Sal let me keep the first dollar I earned fixing his van. I signed it for you. It reminds me my hands are good for more than breaking windows." Inside the envelope was a single wrinkled dollar bill, signed in marker with a date and one word. Thomas. The officer stood across the room, openly wiping his eyes, making no effort to hide it. "He's a good man, Judge. We almost lost him. If I'd booked him by the numbers, if you'd sentenced him the standard way, he'd be in a cell right now with a record, and his daughter would still be out there searching for a ghost." "But he's not a ghost," I said, turning the dollar bill over in my hands. "He's a father, a grandfather, a machinist, a man who shows up 30 minutes early to sweep up glass he broke himself because he said he would." I set it down gently. He was always all of those things. He just needed somewhere warm enough to remember it. I had that dollar bill framed not long after. It hangs in my chambers today, right beside my law degree. A wrinkled, ink-marked dollar bill signed by a man named Thomas, hanging next to 30 years of credentials and professional achievement. It is not worth much at the bank, but to me personally, it remains the single most valuable thing in that room. Justice is so often depicted as a blindfolded woman holding a set of scales, carefully weighing crime against punishment in some perfectly impartial balance. That image has its place. But 30 years on this bench has taught me to keep my own eyes wide open. Because if you look closely enough at the person standing in front of you, you begin to realize they are not always a criminal trying to beat the system. Sometimes they are simply a human being who has already been beaten badly by that very same system, standing there quietly, waiting for someone to finally offer them a hand instead of a set of handcuffs. Thomas walked into my courtroom as a homeless vandal with no last name in the paperwork. He walked out weeks later as a father with a future. And it cost $500, a little trust extended at the right moment, and the willingness to actually listen when a broken man looked a judge in the eye and said, "It was my fault." He meant the window. He also meant everything else. The illness that took his wife, the plant that closed, the grief, the cold that nearly killed him on a Tuesday night. None of that was ever his fault at all.